happy to share a playlist at some point. Although my brain is so random, y'all, I'm not sure what you're gonna get. But good afternoon. Welcome to our monthly CHFS Racial Equity Program. I am joined by an incredible panel today. I'm really excited for the guest that we've got today. With me today is my amazing colleague, Miriam Siman, who leads our resilience work. But also I have Dr. Greta Jones, who is a colleague of mine in the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities, and the amazing Dr. Brandy Kelly-Pryor, who is the CEO of BKP Strategies and doing some incredible consulting work here in the cabinet for us. And just so grateful to have folks on today. I'll just say a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This is a 1-hour discussion where we will be exploring Black history with a focus on how central Black women were, are, continue to be in securing human rights for us all. This panel conversation is going to explore some of our own lessons learned, as well as the importance of ensuring that our history continues to provide important lessons for us all. I want to encourage folks, if you have specific questions, to click on the Q&A box. You'll see it, you should see it at the bottom of your screen. I believe it's the 4th button from the left. It should have Q&A on there. You click on that and you can put questions in there, and we'll click on them and catch them and try to get them answered. Additionally, love the chat box and love having that opportunity for folks to kind of add some thoughts or reflections in the chat box. So if you can select everyone to make sure that we can all, yes, and then Mary's put it in there, if we can make sure that we can all sort of see each other's comments and thoughts and feedback, that's always adds a lot of richness to our conversation. So with that being said, I think we're going to go ahead and jump in and get started, right? So I'm going to sort of turn to my illustrious panel here and just kind of start us off with our first question, which I think I ask probably in all of the racial equity programs. But if you could just say a little bit about what is your why when it comes to doing work around racial equity? And I will start with Dr. Jones.
I knew that. Okay, good afternoon to everyone. Welcome, and we are so delighted that you decided to take some time and join us today. Okay, so the why for me, and I told Rashaad I typed out my answers so I don't get long-winded and I stay on task. So if you see me looking down, that's why. So the why for me is that I sincerely believe that all racial groups have always and continue to provide tremendous value culturally, socially, economically, and so on to our communities, to our states, to our countries. And just the concept of synergy where the combined efforts in anything is greater than any individual group's contribution. I also believe that it's the responsibility of each generation to advance the racial equity work to the best of our abilities and in spite of the challenges. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly-Pryor.
Oh, well, yes, that too. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and to be talking about something that's so precious and important to me. And I think, when Rashaad posed this question originally to us and said, oh, I'm going to ask you about your why. And it really had me in deep thought. And I chose this background as a representation of that. And so this picture here is a representation of my grandmother, or my great-great-grandmother. I feel in so many ways that she was my grandmother, even though I never met her, but she was born in 1871. And I situate myself, as I'm literally situated in your screen, between this woman who born right on the hills of the Emancipation Proclamation, and this little girl here that is my daughter. And it's really about my why really has a lot to do with what is familial to me in this healing and this hope that we can see, but it also is in the fact of from another Black woman, a scholar, I'll call her a scholar, but Fannie Lou Hamer, who was an activist and a freedom fighter, and really about voting rights act throughout this voting rights activism throughout this country. But nobody's free until everybody's free, was what Fannie Lou Hamer said. And so that is my why. That is why I do this work. Not only do I want this little girl to be able to be, be in a world that is free and full of hope and healing, but I want us all to be free. And I know that we cannot do that unless we intentionally work on it, and we work from this space of understanding, from where Candace Bolden, I keep going in the opposite direction here, but from Candace Bolden, my great-great-grandmother, from the world in which she emerged from in the 1870s. So.
Wow.
That's a lot there. Miriam, what would you like to share?
Well, I think for me, it's really an ethical imperative, as a white woman who has had a tremendous amount of privilege. I don't ever remember a time in my life, even as a child, and it's probably why I became a social worker and why I do this work, because it was ingrained in me, where I thought that it was okay that some people had more access, privilege, equity, whatever it might be, than others. So I was a child of the 60s. One of my earliest memories is the march following the assassination of Martin Luther King. And I have a very strong, vivid memory that actually has become a dream over my life that I didn't realize was a memory. I always thought it was just a dream, and turns out it's a memory. But and it was just a part of the work that I felt I was supposed to do. I've never thought about it as a calling, but I guess in some ways it is. And so for me, to be an ethical human means that I have to address inequity, racial inequity, as being one of the biggest inequities in our world. So it's always been part and parcel of the way I saw the work and my life, and not only my professional work, but my human work in that way. We talked a little bit about justice yesterday, some of us, and I think that it is part of my understanding of what does it mean to contribute to a just world.
Appreciate that. So, it's Black History Month. We wanted to make sure we created some space to have a thoughtful conversation around Black History Month. And I think a good way to start that dialogue is just asking you all, what does Black History Month mean to you? And it's, I think it's an important sort of question to ask, because I think there's a lot of ways that we all sort of navigate or experience things like Black History Month. And rather than sort of thinking about it in I guess in a way that maybe feels commercialized, I'm really curious, like, what are some of the personal connections for you? And we'll start with you again, Dr. Jones.
Okay. All right. So Black History Month, from my perspective as a Black woman, I think it's integral because it's a wonderful opportunity for us to remember the sages or the elders, or I call them mavericks, the giants who paved the way for the rest of us. And it's also an opportunity to acknowledge and to celebrate the numerous past and current outstanding contributions that Black people have made and do make to this world. Isaac Newton said, "If I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants." And that's what I feel like for myself. I stand on the shoulder of a lot of Black women, giant men and women too, but women giants. And so from the perspective of other racial groups who acknowledge Black History Month, I believe it's a type of recognition and atonement of sorts for Black people for the many years that we sadly continue to be severely marginalized. So I said, for those who acknowledge, everybody doesn't acknowledge the month, but for those who do, then I really do think they're showing recognition for us, and in my mind, a sort of an atonement as well. But I don't want Black History Month to come and end and just looking at the pictures like roots and things like that that are hard to watch. You know, we need to continue to remember the past and current contributions that Black people make, not just going all the way back to slavery and dealing with that, because that's very traumatic, Miriam. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, so in terms of what it means to me, you know, I think about the history of Black History Month. It started as Negro History Week, the terminology that was used then. So in the 1920s by Carter G. Woodson. And even in thinking about the way that this historian really felt so much love for the ways in which we could celebrate and decolonize our own thinking about, there's language that we've been given over the course of our history in this country, which started before slavery and is going to continue well into the future. And so it was a love, it was an actual, I feel, in many ways, I love that February was chosen when we think about, you know, February in the mainstream of being Valentine's Day. For me, it really is a love letter to what Black people have done for this country from the beginning of our history in this country to the beginning of this country to where we are today. And so that is why I celebrate, you know, I say Black History 365, because I think being a woman, a Black woman who is really proud of all of the ways in which so many different cultures have infused into me, but the way in which I can also infuse my my cultural understanding and awareness. Even before my great-great-grandmother here, there's a long history of a history of my family in this country. And so when I think about Black history, I think about, although we have been that term Black or Negro or all the ways African-American has been socially constructed in this country. You know, you can go to other parts of the world and see people that look just like me in skin tone and might not refer to themselves as Black. So it is very unique to this country to have this social construction of race and the way in which we have it, and is coming throughout the rest of the world in other ways too. But when I think about that social construction, and I think about the ways in which we have not talked about the love that we can each think about, the ways our culture have brought to this country and to this community, that is what I use Black History Month to remind myself. Are we rooting this in love? Are we rooting this in a space of healing? Are we rooting it in a space of hope? And not just on reflection on Black people for Black people's sake in this country, but for all of us to understand the ways in which I had some things happen recently in my medical life, and I was thinking, I'm so grateful for the ways in which Black people unfortunately were abused and used in this country, but it has impacted the way that all of us are able to live a healthy and a thriving life. When we think about people like Henrietta Lacks, whose very cells have been used to pretty much touch everything that we do and think about within our medical world, that is a result of Black history in this country. So it is my love letter, and celebrating it and talking about it, it is my love letter to Black people.
You brought up a few things there that I wanted to take a detour on. You mentioned Carter G. Woodson, and I'm paraphrasing here, but one of the things that he said in regards to, at that time, Black History Week, was that there was a need to one, not simply look at sort of history as there's real history and then there's the history of Black folks. Like that was the intention or the design is, well, actually, no, we need to look at the contributions, the role, the way in which Black people have shaped history, period, right? And this idea that Black history is American history. And so I feel like you were touching on that some, Dr. Kelly-Pryor, and I was curious too, just how you all are, thinking about, thinking about how sometimes we separate that, but we should not separate those things.
Yeah, maybe one day it'll just be history, period. Now, Black history, not the other races' history. I don't know, maybe maybe after someone's showing a picture of me, like you're showing your great, they may have my picture in the background like that before that happens, but hopefully one day it'll be history of America and not just, we have to keep separating it out.
Yeah, and then it's so important that, and I always stand in the juxtaposition of this, in terms of the history of the US, the history of America, American history, and the history of Black people. I think until we are at a place where we can truly understand that we aren't going to be post-racial, and nor am I asking for us to be post-racial in terms of not seeing color. But we do want to get to a place where we can all recognize and understand our contributions in a very holistic way. And I don't think that we're there yet. And so until we are there, I want to keep pinpointing the importance of this happened because of when we think about one of my first lessons in Black history was with the peanut and how the peanut impacts so much of what we do, and George Washington Carver and this scientific mind. And we think about the peanut and peanut butter, but it created so many things. And that was a real big part of my time growing up, of like learning this history that wasn't going to be taught in school. And so I think there is a place for us to say we need to change our curriculum. We need to make this history a part of everyone's history. It doesn't need to be something that is separated out, but I want to still continue to call credence to it until we are there, because we're not there yet.
Yeah, and I think for me that's part of what has been the gift of Black History Month, is coming to really understand and appreciate that all of that kind of what's the right word, that the way I was taught history as a child was leaving out these important factors. And so to be filling in those gaps and understanding that none of the history that I was taught could have happened without also knowing the rest of the story. And I always found it ironic that Black History Month is February, which was when I was a child, Washington's birthday and Lincoln's birthday then was combined into President's Day. But I wondered if there was some deliberateness, intentionality to that, we can't celebrate those quote unquote forefathers, founding fathers, without recognizing the contributions of the whole, and particularly of Black Americans.
And I think something that you're bringing up too, Miriam, is this idea that our history is sometimes difficult, and that there are times when, particularly if we learn one version of history that's not accurate, and then once we do learn a more accurate version of history that incorporates the perspectives of Black folks, of Latinx folks, Indigenous people, that history can become more challenging. And so, like for me, posing this question to you all, why is it important that we do really invest in understanding accurate history, even when it's difficult or even when it challenges us. Why do you think that's important for us to do?
I want to put a pin in what Miriam said really quickly, and I think this also answers your question. But February was intentionally chosen by Carter G. Woodson in the fact that, Lincoln's birthday fell in February, as well as Frederick Douglass' birthday. And when I think about Frederick Douglass, and I am one to, oh my goodness, you will hear in my home, which there's a birthday coming soon, but birthdays are wildly important and I feel like celebrating birthdays are a part of Black history. And knowing that Frederick Douglass had to choose, okay, when's my birthday? When am I born? Because my history was stolen. The language was stolen, the very understanding of who you are as an agentic person and your personhood in terms of who your family might be, in terms of who your partner or your spouse might be, all of that during that dark period of our history as a country. And I don't think of this as Black history. I really think of it, yes, as American history, but the history of enslaving individuals in this country is not, it's not Black history. It's what was happening to Black people in this country. And so when we think about why is it so important, when we think about history, it is important because we are putting a marker in time to say, this happened, these words have meaning, I have meaning, the history of who I've come from, regardless of how dark that past might be, that is what is actually going to get us to, and I can't say it enough, that is what is going to get us to healing and to a hopeful future. When I think about other countries that have had dark past, whether that has been Germany or South Africa, and thinking about the atrocities that have happened to people in those countries due to racial differences, it has been a period of reconciling and reconsidering where did those moments in time start and how do we move past it? And so that is really what I feel is the importance of our history, to be able to all reconcile and move forward.
I'll be brief, believe it or not, Rashaad. But so my response to why we should study Black history, even though it's difficult and challenging, is lest we forget what others have endured and what they have done to make it possible for us, especially Black people, to be able to enjoy truly life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it is difficult in studying the Black history. I've tried to watch some of the movies that have come on television, the older movies. I watched Jackie Robinson's story the other night, and it's very difficult because I kept saying, why must we be treated so badly? Why was he treated so badly? He was a great person. He wanted to do good, but we can't forget what those people, what our forefathers have done and the doors that they have opened for us. And so I take that very seriously, and I try to live my life now in a way that's a credit to them for what they did, for what they endured. I haven't had to endure that, but I get to enjoy now education and living where I want to live. And, we know there's still challenges, but I'm just saying for the most part. But I say, lest we forget, that's why we have to keep studying it in spite of how challenging it might be.
That really resonates with me. And I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat and some of the questions and thinking about, this balance of not saying this is the only time that we look at this, but this is a time that we focus and elevate. And as both Greta and Brandy said earlier, celebrate as well as attend to what has been missing and atone for. And certainly, I think that was very much ingrained in me as part of understanding my Jewish history, which I didn't like as a child. I didn't like the Passover story where we always talked about how bad Jews had it. I thought that was kind of victimizing us in a way that didn't make sense, but I've come to appreciate how it was also instilling a sense of responsibility for moving forward and looking forward in that way. And so, you know, as somebody who studied history and literature in history in my first life, I really think that we have to ground ourselves in where we've come from in order to be able to chart a path to where we're going, and in all of it.
Yeah, you know, I've come to appreciate history as this tapestry that helps us understand the big picture. And, you know, without that, you know, if we are trying to figure out the world without thinking about that history, what has come before, and what has shaped, you know, so much of who we are, which I hopefully we'll talk more about, I think it's very difficult to make sense of things. And I think it's very difficult to think critically about some of the biggest challenges that a society faces. And so some of it is sort of, I think depending on sort of who you are, where you come from, some of it is part of your upbringing, but then I think a lot of it is really necessary if we're going to actually solve some of the most complex challenges that we're dealing with. But, you know, more to this question about history and Black history, what we find is that in Black history and in history in general, I would argue all history in general, that the roles of men are elevated, but, you know, the roles of women are sort of marginalized, or aren't as pronounced as they should be. And so I think about, for example, the Montgomery bus boycott, which simply would not have happened if it wasn't for Black women. There would have been no Montgomery bus boycott. And so I really want to elevate this question of who are some Black women historically that have inspired you, and why? Dr. Jones, you want to start us off?
Brandy, I was waiting. Okay, sure. I'll draw y'all's attention to my poster in the background here that I blew up specifically so I could hang here. And of course, the names of all the women are written across the bottom, and it says Great African Americans / women. So they were great. And there are a whole lot of them there. And if I start getting into why I like them, then nobody else will have time. But I'll mention a couple of them on here, and most of you will know them. Mahalia Jackson, because I love music and I love to sing. So I'm inspired by her. Of course, we know Oprah Winfrey. The center of that picture has Michelle Obama in it. I said if they printed a current one, you might see right here in the corner, this is a picture though of Vice President Kamala Harris. So I put her up there with them. But that picture has a lot of women going back from Harriet Tubman to, of course, Coretta Scott King. So it's just women all through the history. And so one day I just took all of their names and put them in the search, and then just learned a little bit about each one of them. And I feel like I resonate a lot with something with all of them. I have something in common with all of them, and I'm thankful for their stories. And also I have a book that's called 50 Black Women Who Changed America. And it's got some of them, but it's got all kind of in every genre of Black women in here. And I really enjoy reading it and reading the stories of these women, and I resonate with that and pick the good things out that I can emulate in my own life. But I just think it's important that we familiarize ourselves with, especially as Black women, what other Black women have done. We get to learn a little bit about their struggle and about their successes, and again, how maybe to, pattern our lives. And, my children, I have 2 daughters. And so I wanted to make sure that they're familiar. I was surprised how interested my uncle was with this picture today. He took it down and we went through all of the women on there, and he was saying a little bit about all of them, which shocked me. But anyway, it also let me know that him at 98 years old still acknowledged the contributions that these women of all ages have made to us. So again, there's just too many, Rashaad, for me to start getting into why I like them, but I love them all, and I'm thankful for them all.
Oh, I agree with that. There are too many. And can I tell a short story about when Dr. Jones talked about her daughters and having that book? It reminded me of a childhood story. And so when I was 10 years old, I was in my first and my last playground altercation. And so it was a boy who was twice my size, probably in every way. Then I'm a vertically challenged person, so much taller than me in every way. And I grew up in a predominantly white community of Orange County, California. And so this is in the early 90s, I'm sure. And it was so interesting because at this time, the questions that were posed to me, it was like, where did you get your lips done? Or how does your hair do that? My mom, all of these things that people were just so fascinated with my Black girlhood in this elementary school. And I had this infusion of Black womanhood and girlness from home, but it was going out into the world and being now faced with this larger narrative of who you are in this world and how it doesn't seem to fit our quote unquote norm. And so on this particular day, me and my friends are playing, and he decides that he wants to take over the handball court that we're playing on. And so he calls me, I said, I stood up for me and also the friends that I was playing with, and like, no, we are playing here and you're not going to. And so it ended up being, he said to me, you Black superwoman. And I think it was the way in which he said it, but it just set off all kinds of alarms and bells in me. And so and he didn't retaliate back, but I jumped on his back and like, you're not gonna call me that. And I get in trouble, both at school. And then later, my mother said, we're not gonna use any form of physical violence against people. That won't be something that's tolerated. But I also want you to be grateful that someone calls you a Black superwoman. And then she pulls out this book and goes through page by page, everyone from Maya Angelou to Barbara Jordan to Toni Morrison, and just sharing Sojourner Truth, all of these. And this is as a 10-year-old child. And so being instilled very early on with and she was like, this is what it means to be called a Black superwoman. And so you'd be grateful, that someone is seeing that in you, and there's more to process from that later in life. But I think, when I decided I was in a place in my life where there was so much changing in our political trajectory and our democracy. And I saw that there were girls, young women who did not know so many of these Black women that had changed the trajectory of our country, such as Angela Davis and Fannie Lou Hamer, and even mythical characters like Storm, who is an X-Men, and what that cartoon character meant to American history, to see this superhero. And so it was my hope then to go around the country and have these conversations with young Black women. And so I talked to over 200 women about, do you know these stories of these women? And do you know the story of yourself? And so that has been really instrumental. It's something that I'm writing about now, their responses to that. And it has allowed me to see so many bridges that we've been able to come over because of knowing and learning about these other Black women. So beyond the familial, which is really important to me, but I would say definitely Fannie Lou Hamer, Angela Davis, and Zora Neale Hurston are probably some right at the top for me.
I think I grew up knowing like the big names in history, but my parents were listened to a lot of folk music. I spent a lot of time as a child at demonstrations, and Odetta was this huge icon in my childhood. And she was just this presence, she was queenly in a certain kind of way, and she had this booming voice. And I remember thinking how powerful she was as a child. And I also remember that learning about some of the more recent history, like even as a child, and then, you know, as I grew up, understanding Ruby Bridges' story, and, you know, always as a child imagining what was it like to be a child in that position. I clearly had a lot of empathy and high emotional intelligence even then, and was always like imagining what it would be like. And for whatever reason, Medgar Evers' widow, there must have been a picture of her that I had seen as a child, and she was this just presence in my head. Every time I thought about civil rights and about equity, it was like this picture of her was in my head. So there were these very profound images that somehow wormed their way into my consciousness, in addition to like the Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. I also grew up in a family where there was a lot of literature and music, and so I was exposed to Black women writers, I think, very early in my life, and they were I always assumed that they were as important as any other writer, which was lucky for me because they are and they were. But that was a really nice opening. And somebody put Amanda Gorman in. You know, she's my latest. She's my latest crush. So, but you know, I think a lot of women who just were present in my subconscious all the time. And Shirley Chisholm, she just came to me. I was, I think, in high school when Shirley Chisholm ran for president.
Wow.
She was a powerhouse.
I remember reading I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and just being really deeply moved by just the powerful way in which the book is written. But even thinking about you know, some of the figures that we talk a lot about, like Harriet Tubman, but there's something very very sort of visible and tangible in my mind about Harriet Tubman and the work that she did. You know, I've always been, I think, moved deeply by the work of bell hooks, and her writing has shaped at a very fundamental level so much of the way I think about the world. And what a loss for her to have passed. But then there's these incredibly just powerful figures like Angela Davis. The story of Mamie Till, I think, brings tears to my eyes thinking about the choices that she made for the good of civil rights and human rights in this country. And so I think it might have been you, Dr. Kelly-Pryor, just talked about sort of how these folks live in your head sometimes, and are sort of gently pushing you or nudging you or pulling you along to carry on those incredible legacies.
I'm so glad you brought up bell hooks. I mean, knowing that I think when I moved to Kentucky probably 7 years ago, I had these, I had met with bell hooks earlier before that in some of my graduate studies, but just these ideas of, if she is coming from Kentucky, then I know great things are coming from Kentucky. And I had never been really in Kentucky in a living situation, a pass through once or twice. And so my idea about Kentucky, what I knew of Kentucky was Muhammad Ali, bell hooks, and as a vegetarian, KFC, you know, but just to be so profoundly impacted by someone who loved Kentucky, loved Berea, and then also loved the people. I mean, she talks about mental health in a way that I don't think was really explicated in writings until she had talked about, you know, how all of what is confounding us and living in our spaces and our head, particularly that compounding nature of sexism and racism and classism and just the assault that sometimes all of that structurally has on us, and how do we find a place for love and healing? And so I also just wanted to pay homage to Bell Hooks for not only her urging, not in literal sense, but silently her urging to come to Kentucky, a place that I've come to learn and love to be home, but also her love so much for the people.
Rashaad, I'd like to say also that, of course, we talk about a lot of the women from the past and then some that we currently know. I try to support, though, the young writers, especially the Black ones, no matter where I am. If I find somebody that's written a book, and I've got a really good book here, it's called Conditions of the Heart, that one of my good friend's daughter wrote, and it's poetry, and it is awesome. I mean, she's a young Black woman, so she expresses herself in that way, and it's some stuff in there that I'm like, a little risque for me, but anyway, it's great. So no matter where I am, if there's a Black person selling a book, if I gotta buy it now and pay later, I do it to support them, and then I try to keep them on my bookshelf so that I can refer, just to encourage the younger people, and not only just the young people, but those that are doing something now. So it's not just about the past, but again, about supporting those that are here now.
Right. And our colleague, Dr. Mulder has put together a book as well that I think is really important.
Oh.
There is, and not to, I suppose not to go down or to make this the Bell Hooks webinar, which wouldn't hurt actually, and also not to have our secretary throw another shoe at me, but Bell Hooks literally could form the foundation for everything our cabinet does. You know, she personified this idea that everything that we're trying to do to help all of us is connected. She talks about Appalachia. She talks about being a Black woman. She talks about the intersection of sexuality and orientation and economic struggle, poverty, you know, all of that, I think, maybe better than anyone I've ever read. Bell Hooks captures that. And she shows us how all of these things are connected. And when we get in our heads about, oh, well, you're talking about race, so you're not addressing poverty, or we're talking about poverty, so we're not talking about race, or we're talking about one thing, so we're not talking about that thing. No, Bell Hooks really, again, better than almost anyone, writes and talks about, no, all these things are connected, and we have to use a lens that helps us understand how all these things are connected, and that we address them in a connected kind of way. So I just think it's really relevant to the work that we're doing as a cabinet, as a group of folks. There were a couple of questions that rolled in that I wanted to try and make sure we get to. One question, I think we're kind of speaking to this, but definitely if you all wanted to add any thoughts to it, want to invite you to. What are some, or who are some mavericks in your immediate life, and what distinct way did they shape you?
Okay, I'll jump in first this time. There's a lady, and I'll mention her name. Her name is from here in Hopkinsville, Olivia Babbage Gamble. And I don't know, she might be about 12, 15 years older than me. When I was a little girl, though, didn't seem like she was a lot older. But anyway, absolutely amazing. And I know there are people on this line that know her, but I remember watching her as a little girl. She used to sell Mary Kay, always put together. You never saw her. If you saw her at Walmart on Saturday, she was always put together. Very smart, very intelligent. And I just remember thinking, I want to be like her. And she was a businesswoman. So as a little girl, I would say, I want to be a businesswoman when I grow up, and I want to carry a suitcase, and I want to wear stockings and dresses. And so it's like, I began to pattern my life. She never knew this. I finally shared this with her probably about 5 years ago. She had no idea that she had been mentoring me and that she had been a mentor for me my whole life. But she is apt. I think she was the first, I don't want to get this wrong. I don't know if vice president of State Farm, first Black woman, something, something, something. She just retired maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. But huge, huge, huge person here in Hopkinsville. Both her family, the Babbage family, and the Gamble family, who were in the mortuary business. But anyway, she was definitely one that that shaped my life. And also I had a white home economics teacher. She never knew. She told me when I was, cutting up in home economics, when I was supposed to be sewing or cooking or whatever. And I like to make the rest of them laugh. So she would say, Greta, you're a leader. You've got to watch what you do because people do what you do and they follow you. Well, I just thought she was just saying that to keep me from cutting up and having fun. And it never dawned on me. I saw her a few years ago. I said, do you know, I went and got 4 degrees in leadership, including a doctorate, and do you know that the majority of my career, I have been in leadership most of my career. So people have a way of shaping us, or whether they realize it or not, and we're shaping somebody else, whether we realize it or not.
Wow. Well, I grew up with a mother who constantly talked about her home economics teacher as well. And so, and we ended up, really knowing her and coming to get to know her too as children. So that was a wonderful experience, just the way that these teachers have an impact on our lives. My mother was a maverick in that, and she was the probably one of the first special ed teachers, definitely one of the first Black special ed teachers in Pocatello, Idaho. And she really had to advocate for herself in that role. She tells the story of how she goes to the job interview, and this is in the early 70s, and the principal looks at her and says, "Oh, I can't hire you. Do you know who you are?" And she's like, "Yep, I look in the mirror every day. I know who I am. Like, this should not be a problem." And then was there for many, many years as a special education teacher at a time in which, and this really goes back to that Fannie Lou Hamer quote about when I liberate myself, I liberate others, or nobody's free until everybody's free. Is at this time, and the field of special education, children were just starting to be accepted into mainstream schools before they were institutionalized. And so here she was saying, I want to be here, and I want to be here for mostly, children that may not even look like me, but I know that they have something now to offer into this place. And both her and my father, I really, I'm so grateful for the passage of the Civil Rights Act and for Brown versus Board of Education. They both integrated their college in Idaho, and that's how they met each other. But they were just, and there's so much that they're continuing to do. So I think about my mother in that sense, in terms of education and how she's impacted the life of so many children around the country. And then also this great great grandmother, her mother was organizing women who were doing laundry and fighting for voting of women and women's equal rights. And this is in the 1800s. And so we normally hear about that movement of women's liberation in the 1900s, but it started so much earlier than that. And so to have that long history of how women have really come into their own, being able to have their own economic freedom, but also being able to fight for the freedom and education of children and people around the world. That's been my story.
Rashaad, the people who, there are all kinds of people who are famous and have made a name and have done amazing things in this world. But when you pose that question, what I immediately thought of are the extraordinary, ordinary people, the people who are just living their life. Like, I feel like I'm looking at 2 of the people who inspire me, 2 of the Black women who inspire me, and they're all over this cabinet. And that's where I have learned I think the most important, both knowledge and inspiration, lessons for living, inspiring lessons for living, just is in working together and understanding what I need to be aware of that takes me out of just my perspective. And so I really, I know it sounds trite and a little bit silly, but that's really what's been inspiring me. And I was thinking about, where did that come from? And I keep going back to the story when I was 7 and my cousin was getting married and I was going to be her flower girl, and she had no parents, my parents had no money, and or relatively little money. And like this, the idea of paying for this wedding was really complicated. So my cousin borrowed my aunt's wedding dress, and then our Black housekeeper said to my mother, meet me at this store and you can get Miriam a flower girl dress for not a lot of money. And so we went to a part of Mamaroneck that we probably never would have been at. I think we were probably the only white people there. This was 1968. And we bought this beautiful dress. And Claire forever was this resourceful fund of knowledge. She saved the day, right? And she was this tall, lean Black woman from South Carolina who unfortunately chain smoked and ended up dying of cancer. But she was this fixture in my childhood, as she knew she could solve the problem, because she solved our after school problems, she solved our household problems, and then she solved this really big problem. I don't know, maybe that's where it comes from, but that's where when I think of inspiration, I think of the daily stuff and just the work that we all do. So thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Jones and Dr. Kelly-Pryor.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So I wanted to make sure I asked this question that was shared with us by one of the participants on the call. And this is for Dr. Jones and or Dr. Kelly-Pryor. How do you make yourself seen in a room where you may be the only Black woman, the only person of color in the room? How do you make yourself seen?
Well, I'm holding up this book while I talk. Maya Angelou, Phenomenal Women, Phenomenal Woman, because I'm a phenomenal woman. So regardless as to what the rest of the people in the room think of me, I think I have pretty high self-esteem. Now, again, we do go into rooms where, some people choose not to see us, but I finally have gotten to a point in life, and it was a late coming, but anyway, where I am happy with myself. I'm comfortable with myself. Still need some work to be done on me, but I'm happy with myself. And you know what? Those people who choose not to get to know me or want to know me, they are missing out. I feel sorry for them. So I am, I go in and I'm confident. I try to be very prepared wherever I go and try to be on time. And so again, I think people see that. I walked into a room one time, and this lady told me that I was a breath of fresh air. Well, at that time, I was going through a very difficult situation, and it was like a tornado going off in my head and in my whole body. So when she said that, I thought, that's because it's a tornado. I didn't tell her, but I'm thinking that's because it's a tornado going off in my head and you're feeling the air from that. But so even when things are going on in our life, I just try to be a person of integrity. And again, to treat people like I want to be treated. And again, if they choose not to want to have anything to do with me or respect me, I let that be their problem and I leave it there.
And it's been a long time coming to that. I think, I told the story about, being harmed or hurt by the words of "you Black Superwoman," and just thinking and having to go through that experience, although they weren't harmful words per se, it was the way in which it was said. And so I think in terms of growing and developing in this world, two really good books, and I don't know if you all will be able to see them, and I'll take my screen off so I can show you at the end, but are by younger Black women. One is "This Will Be My Undoing" by Morgan Jorkins, and the other is "Eloquent Rage" by Brittany Cooper. And the thing that I've learned over the course of these few decades is that, I don't want to be ignored, but I also need to protect my peace. right? And so I don't need to be the superwoman. I don't need to be everybody's everything. If you don't see me in the room, then that in some ways, just as Dr. Jones is saying, like that has to be your problem. And we know over the course of history that Black women have fixed so many things. So it is really your loss to not see what can be brought to the table. And I'm so sorry for you for that, if that is the case. But at the same time, I think it is important, and not just for Black women, but I think for anybody who is in this space that goes in there, trying, constantly, can you hear me? Can you see me? Protect your peace and just say, and once the silence is loud enough, you will be seen. So.
Love it, love it, love it. I can't add a thing to that. I just will say, if you don't know Dr. Jones or Dr. Kelly-Pryor, it is kind of your loss. They are not.
We're
this
phenomenal
is not
women.
bluff. This is not a bluff. Like, they are some of my favorite people. So I know that we are, awesome. Yes, we can see that.
Right.
Lovely. So Dr. Kelly-Pryor and Dr. Jones are showing books. Miriam is putting links in the chat as well and making me look like a horrible co-host. Go ahead, Miriam. So thank you all. Thanks everyone for your participation. You're lovely. Miriam also put the survey chat the survey link in the chat. Please complete the survey, y'all. Your feedback is what helps us keep getting better at doing these programs and figuring out what we should do next, right? And so your insights, your feedback, your perspectives helps us keep figuring out good content for you. And it gives me some ideas of wonderful guests to invite to have conversation with. Our 2022 schedule of racial equity and trauma resilience programs will continue on the first and third Thursday of the month at 2 p.m. We want to encourage you to keep getting involved, reach out to your department to find out who is my racial equity champion or contact, who is my resilience champion or contact, how can I get in touch with them so I can help support the work happening in my department. And there is a lot of work going on in departments. So we want to encourage everyone to get involved. The secretary tells us lead from every seat. So there's opportunity for us all to elevate our voice and be part of the solution. Looking forward to your feedback on the survey. Dr. Jones, Dr. Kelly-Pryor, Miriam, thank you so much for joining today. Y'all are amazing. Happy Black History Month, everybody.
Happy Black History Month, everyone. Bye-bye.
It was an honor to be among this group. Thank you.
You as well. Thank you all so much.
Me as well.
Thanks, everybody.